Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're diving headfirst into something that could seriously affect your next car purchase.
That's right. We're talking about President Trump's 25% tariffs on imported cars.
Yeah, 25%, that's a big number. We've been digging into all the latest news and analysis on this, trying to figure out what it all means, especially for anyone thinking about buying a new car anytime soon.
Yeah.
Our price is going to go up.
Yeah, and which car companies are going to be hit the hardest.
Exactly. And the big thing behind all of this, at least from what we're seeing, is to try and get more cars made here in the U.S.
Right. Made in America.
But the thing that jumps out right away is, well, the potential for car prices to really spike.
Yeah.
And when you start looking closer, it looks like Mazda in particular might be in a really tough spot, more so than a lot of other car companies. So let's break down why that seems to be the case.
Well, Mazda is in a kind of unique situation because they make most of their cars for the U.S. market overseas.
Okay, yeah.
Like, they only actually assemble one model here in the States, the CX-50.
Yeah.
But the other 7 models they sell here, including the super popular CX-5, are all built in either Japan or Mexico.
And speaking of the CX-5, that's not just any old car for them, right? I mean, they sold a ton of them last year, like over 134,000 CX-5s in 2024.
Wow.
Which, by the way, is a third of their total U.S. sales. They hit 424,382 vehicles sold, which is actually a 16% jump from the year before. So they're doing well.
They're doing really well.
Clearly, they're doing something right, People like their cars. They're known for being pretty affordable and fun to drive.
Yeah, that's Mazda's whole thing, right? Affordable, sporty SUVs.
But now enter these tariffs, and suddenly things are looking a little dicey, right?
Yeah, right.
Because think about it. The base model of the CX-5, it starts around $28,770 right now. But if Mazda decides to just pass that whole 25% tariff onto the buyer, well, we could be looking at a price tag closer to $36,000 after April 3rd.
Oh, wow.
That's a big difference. It's like taking the price of a decent used car and just slapping it onto the price of a new one.
Right. That's a huge increase.
Yeah. And it's not like it's just the CX-5 that's affected.
Oh, no.
We saw that the CX-90, the CX-70, the Miata, the Mazda 3 hatchback, all of those are made in Japan. And then you've got the CX-30 and the Mazda 3 sedan made in Mexico. And all of those are going to be hit with these tariffs, too.
Yeah.
We're talking about, like over 80% of their U.S. sales last year came from these 7 models.
Yeah, so basically almost their entire lineup.
It makes you wonder, how did they end up with so much of their production overseas? Was it just, a cost thing? Or were there other factors at play?
Yeah, I mean, car companies have lots of reasons for setting up their factories in different parts of the world. Sometimes it's cheaper labor. Sometimes it's because they have specific expertise in certain regions, or maybe they've got really good relationships with suppliers in those places. And for a company like Mazda, they're not as big as, Toyota or GM. So for them, it probably made sense to really focus their production in a few key spots where they could be as efficient as possible. Building factories all over the place is expensive,
Right. So it was probably a strategic decision to concentrate their production to stay competitive. But then, something like this tariff comes along and it kind of throws a wrench in the works.
Exactly, yeah.
Now, I guess the one bit of good news for Mazda is that they do have that one model made in the U.S., the CX-50.
Yeah.
And they just released a new version of it, too.
Oh, really?
So maybe they'll see a little bump in sales there. But, even so, most of their cars are right in the line of fire with these tariffs. And we even saw a comment from a Mazda fan on Reddit. They were really worried about it, hoping the policy gets changed. I mean, you have to wonder how Mazda is going to keep their customers happy if prices go way up.
Yeah, they've built a reputation for offering good value. So if their cars suddenly become a lot more expensive, that could really hurt them. It'll be interesting to see how they respond. Maybe they'll try to absorb some of the costs themselves, even though the experts are saying they probably can't do that for very long.
Yeah.
Or maybe they'll have to pass most of it onto the buyers. And that could give an opening to their competitors who make more of their cars here in the U.S.
So Mazda's in a tough spot. But what about the rest of the industry? Are other car companies facing the same kind of problems?
Well, it's not just Mazda that relies on international production.
Oh, okay.
We've got Nissan, Volkswagen, Stellantis. They all have a big presence in Mexico. And they've all had some trouble with sales lately, too.
So they're also bringing a lot of cars into the U.S. from Mexico.
Exactly. But here's the key difference. They also have factories in the U.S.
Oh, okay.
Unlike Mazda, they're not putting all their eggs in one basket. So they've got more options. If the imported cars get too expensive because of the tariffs, they could just focus on selling the ones made here.
Ah, so that gives them a bit of a buffer.
Yeah, a safety net.
Can you give us some examples of like popular models that are actually made here?
Sure. Volkswagen makes their ID.4, the electric SUV, in Tennessee.
Or
Nissan makes the Rogue, their best-selling SUV, also in Tennessee. And Stellantis makes the Ram 1500 pickup truck and the Jeep Wrangler. Those are big sellers. And they're made in Michigan and Ohio.
So even though some of their cars from Mexico might get hit with the tariff, they've got these other really popular models that are made here and won't be affected.
Exactly. So they can kind of balance things out a bit, maybe adjust their pricing a little, or focus their marketing on the U.S.-made models.
So they have more wiggle room than Mazda.
Definitely.
Now, we also read that President Trump is putting some pressure on the car companies, trying to get them to just absorb the cost of these tariffs.
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk about that. Like
Yeah.
he's basically saying, don't raise prices for the customers, just eat the cost yourselves.
Eat a 25% cost.
Yeah, basically.
I mean, that's a lot to ask of any business.
It is. And most experts are saying it's just not realistic.
Yeah.
Like Jonathan Smokes, he's the chief economist for Cox Automotive. He's been pretty outspoken about it. He's saying there's just no way car companies can fully absorb a cost that big.
Okay. So what's his reasoning?
Well, for one thing, he says it would be super complicated to even track all the goods and figure out how to apply these tariffs. And then on top of that, it's going to disrupt the whole supply chain. Like car companies have these carefully planned out systems for getting parts and building cars, and throwing a wrench into that is going to slow everything down.
Oh, so it could actually lead to fewer cars being available.
Exactly. And that's going to drive prices up even more. It's basic economics,
Uh,
less supply, higher demand, higher prices.
Right, right. So this idea that car companies can just magically absorb a 25% tariff, it's just not likely to happen.
Yeah, most experts agree on that. It's more likely that those costs are going to end up getting passed along to the buyers somehow.
Yeah, so maybe it won't be a straight up price increase, but maybe they'll offer fewer discounts or something.
Right. Or they might delay releasing new models that were supposed to be more affordable. There are ways to get creative with it.
So, bottom line, what does all this mean for the average person who's just trying to buy a car?
Well, the main takeaway is that prices are probably going up.
Okay.
That's the most likely outcome. But like we've been talking about, it's not going to affect every car company equally. Companies like Mazda, who make most of their cars overseas, are going to have a harder time than companies who have more factories here in the U.S. So this whole thing could really shake up the car market and make a big difference in how much you end up paying for your next car.
It shows how these big global trade policies can actually trickle down and have a real impact on people's everyday decisions. So let's recap. We've been talking about these new tariffs on imported cars, the ones that are meant to boost American car manufacturing. We saw that Mazda's in a particularly tough spot because they rely so much on factories in Japan and Mexico. Other companies like Nissan, VW, and Stellantis, they'll be affected too, but they have a bit of an advantage because they also have factories here in the US. And even though President Trump's pushing for it, the experts are saying it's pretty unlikely that car companies will be able to absorb the full cost of these tariffs, which means, yeah, prices are probably going up for consumers.
Yeah, that's the big picture.
And that brings us to the big question for all of you listening. As you're thinking about buying your next car, what are the things you're going to be thinking about most? Is price going to be the deciding factor? Will you start looking more at brands that make their cars here in the US? Or are you sticking with your favorite brand no matter what, even if it means paying a little more?
Yeah, it's a tough decision.
It's a really interesting situation, and it'll be fascinating to see how both the car companies and the car buyers react. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive today.
Thanks for listening, everyone.